I am Bernice Chao. I'm the co-founder. Jessalyn Lamb is the other co-founder. She's also on this call, but we're really glad to have the space. And today we have a very special moderator, Suzie Bao, which is our Asians in Advertising board member and a group account director. So throwing this over to Suzie.
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you all. Thanks for joining. Lots of old friends and new ones too. So happy to see you. Everyone just drop in where you're calling from. And we have such a great panel today. And we're just so excited to introduce to you our panelists, our C-suite panelists. These are all members of the AAPI community. We have first off, Atit Shah. He is the CCO of Digitas North America. Welcome, Atit.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And Chrissie Hanson. She's the CEO of OMD USA. Hello, Chrissie.
Hi, it's great to be here. Hello.
And next we have Ronnie Felder. He is the Chief People Officer of VMLY&R. Welcome. And last but definitely not least, Naseemuddeen, CEO of Omelet. Welcome, our panelist.
Wow.
So let's start this conversation. We'll start with Atit. Tell us who you are, a little bit about yourself, and what is your Asian background?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Atit Shah, Chief Creative Officer of Digitas North America. Live in Brooklyn with my wife and two kids. And my background-wise is, South Asian. My parents are first-generation Indian immigrants. I think I haven't really had to, I grew up actually in small town, Pennsylvania. I grew up outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. And so it wasn't until you quickly learn to assimilate. And it wasn't until I came here and in my later years that I've started to reflect on what the imprint of being Asian has been on my professional trajectory. And so in part because of things like this that have happened very recently. Until then, I just kind of did my thing. And so we'll talk more about that later.
Fantastic. And next, Chrissie, tell us about you and where are you from?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So thank you for the time. I was born in Hong Kong. My mother is Chinese. My father is American. I grew up there for 18 years at a time when it was still a British colony. So went to schools and had that sort of, I suppose, upbringing and culture. And you always assimilate, right, as best you can. But actually, in that environment, you're always the outsider. And then at the age of 18, I went to the UK for university. I did a law degree, then I did a marketing one, and then I first got into media in 2000 in London, and I worked there for 11 years, and then I moved to Los Angeles. So LA is where I call home, and I am an American, but I always have to explain it because the accent automatically makes people think I'm not, and that's always been very interesting, right? You are always the outsider, even if you're the insider. So.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about that. And Ronnie, we have another biracial AAPI member here. Tell us about your background.
Yeah, my mother is Korean. My father is American. I was born in Germany and lived most of my young life, earlier years outside of the US. And then, I know we'll get into this later, but similar to what others have said, assimilated a bit more as I moved to the US. And, I consider New York home, even though my first introduction to living in the United States was Alabama. And then now I'm living in Kansas City. Love Kansas City. A big shout out for Kansas City. But I still consider New York home after 20 years living there. And yeah, that's a bit about me.
Fantastic. Welcome. And Thaz, tell us about your background.
Hi, I'm Naseemuddeen. I am the CEO over at Omelet. My pronouns are she, her. I am Sri Lankan, Canadian, Muslim American. So every single word you could possibly find, all put together. I also wanted to just take a quick moment to send good energy, prayers, all the things that you possibly can to the incredibly brave women of Iran today, just again, fighting for their lives. It's a reminder of our intersectionality and kind of who we are, even if we are, Asian American, we also have different kind of rootings within our cultures. My background is a weird and wiggly one. So I actually started this career path out as a figure skating coach in Canada, and moved on to become a preschool teacher, and then eventually fell into advertising. And I've been a career strategist, agencies like BBH and Chiat and Deutsch. And I started over at Omelet as the chief strategy officer, and I took over the CEO role 3 years ago.
Wow, what a fascinating background, and definitely not a linear one at all. So let's get into some really kind of deep questions. So we talked about before that, I think because of all of our, different backgrounds, and it's not a linear path for any of us. So do we need to create our own path? What do you think, Thaz? You talked about your path. So it seems like you had to create it. And do we all need to do that?
I think there's a lot to kind of how paths begin, because I don't think there's planning that we can all do, and then there's this like beautiful thing called fate that I think kind of takes wings at some point, particularly when we choose creative paths. I think again, no matter what part of the business we're in a creative industry, so I do think that you have to be comfortable in the gray, and I think that's something that I've always been quite comfortable in, which has probably been a good thing for this industry, but understanding that paths aren't linear, and there was no linear path to from being a strategist to being the CEO of a company. I still don't think that's a really linear path, but it's about taking those experiences and really building upon them and doing it your way. Because again, the way I am the CEO of a company is very different from somebody else, and again, I bring my experiences to whatever opportunities kind of sit ahead of me, and I think that's something we should all be doing.
Great. And Atit, you talk about, you've been a leader for quite a long time. You've had quite a run. So do we need to create, you talked about different archetypes. Is AAPI a special archetype to be a leader?
I'd hate to box us in that way, because I've seen, across even our own spectrum, so many leadership types and so many archetypes. But I think that what we do represent as a collective is a need to shed kind of the classical archetypes of leadership. I think that, speaking from personal experience on the creative side, as someone who rose as a creative leader in industry, Bernice and Suzie, we talked about this a bit, but there was a push at some point as a creative leader to be the kind to, frankly, is a bit more of an asshole. Like I was told by a nurturing manager, one who I have deep respect for, at some point in my career, that I needed to be more of an asshole, because that's what creative directors at a certain level do. It's not necessarily being brutal or mean, but being brashly decisive was a sign, almost a way of, it was seen as almost a sign of an archetype standpoint of peacocking in the room and asserting command, in a way that got people to follow. I've learned to be more decisive, but very much in my own style. I think we've all had to learn how to become our own archetypes. And I think that that's just one example of many. I think we think about the typical classical, creative leader. They're seen as brash, a bit rock and roll, a bit abrupt, a bit like not playing by the rules. And these have been qualities we've admired. There's a bit of, gunslinging to that archetype over time. What we've seen is the emergence, in part because of AAPI leaders, but of all non-linear leaders, in the way that Thaz was describing, who've been more collaborative, who found a way to be a builder in a situation, who've been more thoughtful and not necessarily the loudest or brashest in the room, but the one who then seized something they heard that was great and helped it bloom, been more of a cultivator than the clash, if you will, And it served me really well. And as we get new generations of folks, and as we look to get new young ranks in industry, for a lot of reasons, not just ethnicity, the old ways don't apply. And so it's now more than ever a chance to question archetypes of the past in all of our roles.
I love that. I love that you broke old archetypes and create your own that works for you. And you're a magnificent leader.
Thank you,
So
Suzie.
we're glad you're here. Chrissie, like many of the folks on the panel, you're quite the global citizen, and both culturally and where you've lived. So have you had trouble finding belonging, and what does that mean to you now?
I think, have I had trouble finding belonging? As a child growing up in Hong Kong, so the answer is yes. Have I found it now? Yes. As a child, I was always very aware of how small on a map Hong Kong was, right? And I was also very aware of how I didn't belong, right? I wasn't, let's call a spade, right? I wasn't wide enough for many people, and I wasn't Asian enough either. And so it was a very early acknowledgement of that understanding, and that you're moving through this world in this body that's growing and figuring its place. And so I always knew I would live somewhere else, because and I think it's the most incredible city, and it shaped who I am, and it's the fastest place, and it therefore made me not feel the need to sort of live and work in New York. LA is my home. But I think I would never undo it. But what it gave me was a real thoughtfulness and awareness of the challenges that other people have, for different reasons. And what does belonging mean, and why is it important, right? That kind of safety. And it's kind of fundamental to how great you can be in life and in work, right? Because if you don't have that belonging, you actually don't have that sense of safety and security. And in a work context, we call it increasingly inclusivity, right? And you say, well, why is that important? And it's like, well, if I have that sense of safety and security, then I have the bravery with which to ask questions and be more kind of inquisitive. And if I'm not those things, I will never be as informed as I can be. And if I don't have that, I will not be brave. I will not be intrepid. And if I cannot do that, how will I ever make the work that is impactful and inspiring? And so have I felt lack of it? 100%, especially when I was younger. But perhaps that also comes when you're just figuring out you. I did feel like I belonged when I was in London. I certainly wasn't conscious of my differences, because I think if people were ever challenging with me, and it was because of race, ethnicity, so on and so forth, I didn't interpret that way. I chose to see it as, because I'm short, was that why? Or because I'm left-handed, right? I would just fix on different things. But it was only really when I had lived in LA for a couple of years, that my husband, who's English, he said to me, goes, you are much more comfortable now. And I said, what? And he goes, you belong. And I said, I belonged where I was before. And he was like, no, it's different. And I think that's also what comes with greater belonging for me has been having my own family unit. I have no question about my north, my south, my east, and my west stars of life. And therefore, in understanding those, I have become really confident in the kind of leader I am. And I probably don't fit into a lot of CEO models, right? But I know that my voice is credible, and it is powerful in its own way. And with that comes a kind of contentment. So belonging is a really interesting word, because I think the struggle with it makes you, if you're conscious of it, can make you really strong in what you do.
Absolutely. And Ronnie, I know this is an interesting topic for you, being Chief People Officer, biracial, and that is a topic you deal with from personally and professionally. So how do you handle, what do you think belonging means in a professional sense, and how do you bring your personal sense of belonging into your work?
Yeah, kind of opposite of what Chrissie said. When I grew up, it never occurred to me to identify as being Asian. My mother, like many Asian mothers, raised me to be as all American as possible in preparation for moving to the US. I didn't know that. And, growing up abroad, being born in Germany and living in Yugoslavia and then Korea, I went to international schools where, I knew I was half Korean, and we lived in Korea for many years and got to be with family and friends. But, I didn't identify as Asian because I wasn't really taught customs or language. I was exposed to it kind of unintentionally. And then, it was interesting because it never occurred to me to have that identity. And then, when we moved to the United States, we moved to Alabama, and it was the first time that I realized that I was different. And that's when it came to, what was my belonging? Here I am living in Alabama, and, people would point out specifically, what are you? Where are you from? And because I was raised to think that I was always American, but living abroad, I had friends, my closest friends, my friend group at the time was from Japan, Zimbabwe, Poland, and then me. And the most exotic person I met once was a family that moved from Canada. And I was like, Canada, what's this place, Canada? Because I was so exposed to such an international community. And then when I moved to Alabama and realized I was such an other, it confused me for a very long time. And growing up as a child, I was the kid on stage at every show. I was the loud one. I was the center of attention always. And then when I moved to the United States, I quickly realized I wanted to be as invisible as possible. I did not want to show up. I wanted to try to blend in. And, none of that occurred to me till later, of like why I became such an introvert, but I still think I am today. Even being on this panel, as you guys know, I was like, nah, I don't think so. But, belonging has been so important because I finally found it when I moved to New York, and I got into, my friend group, and really started to understand and own not being Asian enough, as people would say, but also not identifying as being all American or white enough. I learned to just kind of get a bit more comfortable in my skin, even if it was being a bit more quiet and introverted. And belonging, I think, is important because, it's finally, especially now where I work, I'm surrounded by a company and people that I work with that kind of embrace this idea of belonging in a way that we make sure that we can manifest it in every single sense of how we come to work and how we support each other. But it took many years for me to really recognize, what an impact it had on me to go from a world of just completely like kind of ignorance of what identity really needed to mean on a playground versus what it means to you in your professional work setting. I do feel fortunate to be supported by a company and a leadership team that does provide opportunities for this, but it's discussions like this that have to happen in order for us to continue to make room for others and to make sure that we are being intentional about making belonging, just part of who we are, because it doesn't seem to obviously come natural. It has interfered with our ability to really embrace this idea of becoming an inclusive country that provides opportunities for all. Just a bit about belonging, I guess, in my perspective.
That's great. Well, thank you for leading the pact on that topic, because it is important, and being in charge of the humans in your organization, you remind us like we are all humans, so we belong in that group for sure. So Thaz, we talked about, Atit talked about creating your own archetype and breaking the old. And we touched upon belonging, not having this linear path too. So then, with all of this, how does one find their voice? Thaz, how did you find your voice?
I don't know. One day I just started talking and it just started all coming out. No, it's a really beautiful thing. I think finding your voice really boils down to being in a place that allows you to be yourself, and like yourself, not the self that the mass self. And we all have different professional identities. But I think the ones that allow you to truly like kind of be every ounce of who you are is what truly allows you to find your voice. Because it's one thing to be able to like speak up in meetings and all of that, but really that comes from the confidence in yourself and your points of view. So I really credit my time at BBH when I was employee number 8. And a big part of who we were shaped by our personalities, not only by our job titles and what we did, but who we were as people and interesting humans who are coming to the table with our most expressive selves. So I never had to apologize about the fact that I love the Muppets, and that is something I like to talk about. And when I got my at age 40 under 40, that was the first line in there, was how much I love Kermit the Frog. It's like, but that was a part of who I am. And like being able to, again, find those elements of yourself and really be able to celebrate that, I think is hugely important. And, it's funny because it's through those that, I love Oscar the Grouch too. Pretty big props on him. But like the best alliances and friends I have in this industry have grown from the authenticity of who I am, more than just kind of what I can do in my work. I'm excellent at my job. I know what to do. And again, having the confidence to say, I know what I'm doing with work. Like I'm great. I know how to be a great strategist, but you know what? I need to bring myself to that, to my practice and my craft to really be able to differentiate what my voice sounds like in this world. And truly in my world, the voices and bodies look very different from me. I come from strategy where there's mostly incredibly nice, wonderful white male, like English men, which I'm like, that is the body of the chief strategy officer that I grew up knowing. And I think we're so fortunate to be living in a time where that is shifting, that's changing. And we are part of a great kind of, a great new opening of voices. And that's where I think it's so important to bring yourself as part of that, because it's not just your identity. It's also what your identity is shaped in your person. And I would love to see kind of as we start to develop our voices, that is such an incredible way to differentiate yourself. So yeah, let's talk about my voice.
That's great. I love Kermit the Frog too.
Also have Fozzie
Who
Bear
does it?
at all times. Yep.
So Atit, I mean, you found your voice and you created your own archetype, and you are not the asshole creative leader that someone told you should be. So then is it hard to bring out that vulnerability as a leader?
No, I think that, I found over time, I think that while I am of the mindset that, that we have to, as Thaz has talked about, it's a lot of us have talked about like embody your own archetype. And I truly believe in that. But I do think that we talk about vulnerability. There is a rite of passage in a workplace. I think that I don't think you can get around if the goal is to scale your influence and be heard, which is like, I think that we do have to embrace the vulnerability. I think vulnerability is the greatest stage for our next big leap in the leap of our employees. And so there's something kind of amazing when someone who isn't typically the loudest voice in the room or the one who is the most opinionated or takes up all the oxygen, which is often, as we think about, without a sweeping generalization, but folks of the AAPI community tend to not be that loudest voice for a lot of communal, ingrained, lean and all of these things. There's something powerful, and it's been powerful for in my own career time and time again, when you embrace that stage of vulnerability and you actually make yourself heard in a room full of seniors, or you're in a key client presentation, and and you pipe in, not just for the sake of hearing your own voice, but because you have a redirect or a new way to reframe or think about it. And those can be the scariest and most vulnerable times. I can look a lot like than the rest of the cast. I can talk at a different volume. I can have a different dispositional sense altogether. But those have been the moments where time and time again, I left a mark on the room or on the people or on the work, or I can like count on, each finger and then some toes, moments in my career where that was a milestone or a meter. And so I do think, there's a lot of discourse right now about being able to be ourselves, to be, whether it be introverted or more communal, or be like, there's a lot of like desire to empower the total us. But I'm of the camp that there's no getting around the need to embrace a certain vulnerability and take the dive once in a while when you have something to say. And I do think that's an important key for this community, and a lot of communities that aren't the archetype, that aren't the, to get ahead and get what's theirs, and so it's like, I hope that answers your question. I do think that vulnerability is one of the core assets and weapons in advancing yourself and advancing what you think in and advancing the work, and there are rites of passage moments where we need to make that leap, to embrace that moment and to find our voice in a sea of voices,
Yeah, it definitely makes you a standout leader, and being able to show that it's more courageous than it is, a weakness, and it shows that you're human.
That's right. And you get a lot more. Last thing I'll say about it is there's a lot more currency on being the voice that waits and decides when they're going to make that leap into it. They're the residents. We've all been in that room where the person who you didn't expect to say something, who you knew was thoughtful, who took that dive. I think we've all been witness to someone doing that and having that moment. And immediately something seismic happens, right? About your perception of them, the attitude and energy of the meeting you're in, the work. I've seen it time and time again.
Well, thank you. So, Chrissie, I think we talked about how, the different experience you have in Hong Kong versus London versus now that you're in LA. I'm sure we've all experienced microaggression in workplace or out of the workplace, but how can outside microaggression, hurt you in the workplace?
Oh, I think in a myriad of ways, right? I think hurtful, and it's the unexpectedness with which hurt is inflicted and how you then react to it. Because if you're ready for a punch, right, that can go up. It's when you're not expecting it and it's casually said. It's the how it then affects you, and then the confidence with which you show up, right? Whether it's into a meeting, into a call, as you're looking at work. And it is therefore so important to have, I think, self-belief, but also give yourself a break, right? And recognize that. And if you can, think through and allow the feeling to pass, because otherwise, depending on what the comment is or the effect it had, it could shake how you approach a problem, right? It could shake your confidence in a situation. And depending on the magnitude of the next meeting you have, that's probably the last thing you needed, right? Some casual, unkind words, or even if it's not directed at you, right? My mother's Chinese, so she, it's not irregular with which I get a phone call and have to attend to a situation or calm her down, or why was something said and what, right? And that affects you as well. So I think I don't think anyone on this call underestimates the microaggression. What I hope that you will feel is to just give yourself the space to then think it through, and if it hurts, talk about it, because it's not that micro. Right. And after a certain number of years, the micros all build up. Right. So we don't underestimate it. And I think it's also making sure that other people are clear if they have inflicted it. So I think that's kind of greater awareness of what counts as micro. That's one of the things I seek to try and make a little better in the world around me. But yeah, I don't underestimate it, and it has definitely affected me. But I try to be pretty open in how I deal with things, right? So I think I'm a fairly vulnerable person and honest about things, because it makes us all a bit stronger if you can model it and see it in others. So
I've heard microaggression being described as a mosquito bite. You know, one little bite's annoying, irritating, but when it's all over your body, it's painful and it's a problem.
it'll be a disaster, right?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously. Yeah, I'm mosquito bites and I do not do well together at all. But no, it's yeah, I think it's serious stuff. And that's why, you know, I'm sure every organization has a level of sort of training in tackling it, and why those programs are really important, because often people don't know, right? They don't know why that wasn't appropriate. And it's always really interesting if it's those in a close circle, whether it's friends or close colleagues who are friends, how you then tackle that. Because I also believe that the impact we make on our smaller circles is perhaps the most valuable that we have. And if you take the time to educate those who are close to you, you kind of hope that, and I believe it happens, right? There's a pay it forward that goes on, and if all groups did that over time, we get to a better world. So yeah, fight the mosquitoes, hey.
And Ronnie, we talked about, I mean, you deal with, of course, all the underrepresented group and the mass group as chief people officer. So how do we begin to build bridges and come together? You know, have you thought about that in your role? I'm sure that is a big part of your goals as the chief people officer.
Yeah, no, we definitely, I think some of my colleagues may be on this call. So if I misspeak, feel free to correct me in the chat, guys. But I'm surrounded by an amazing group of people. You saw Tasha Gilroy on here earlier, and Sebastian Nataraja, who's also here, I believe. Them and the team, they're helping us to really make sure that we have opportunities for their ERGs. Now, I think in the past, the challenge with ERGs is they were empowered just to be kind of a group of a community group that would come together to do like cultural celebrations, if you will. And they weren't even celebrations. A lot of times it was, unfortunately, in years past, just kind of reinforcing some stereotypes kind of in the workplace. And then ERGs really grew to become more about communities. And now we've really, with their leadership, have really reinforced that ERGs need to be empowered to actually help influence change when it comes to policies and when it comes to how we approach work, how we support our employees in growth and development, and looking at kind of every aspect of the human experience at work. Because we have to stop thinking that if the majority is in power to make decisions and we're not asking kind of the minority of our organization to help us understand what is necessary to support, you know, more community, more connection, and really create that safety, then we're losing the opportunity to really get that level of influence and support. And you know, it's things like this that we, you know, I think we do an amazing job in our company of providing an opportunity for forums and conversations. But, you know, sometimes this fatigue sets in where people don't know where to spend their time because there's such a vast amount of intersectionality that happens within any of our communities. And when, you know, what was surprising to me is, I don't know if Clara's on the line, but I know that she is actively involved with your organization, with the organization. And she was a big influence in me kind of realizing and reminding me that that Asians in advertising, like when we think about the Asian, the vastness of how many cultures make up, like, you know, AAPI, we don't probably do enough to support one another, much less what we're doing to build bridges and communities within our kind of own, if you will, like, you know, communities. And we had kind of talked about this when we got introduced about it, that I think there's been a lot of opportunities. I've seen an Asian leader speak at a conference, and I, being the kind of introvert that I am, wanted to walk up to them and say, I want to get to know you more, and I want to talk to you more, and I want to build a better network and community so that we can begin to talk more about how we how we have opportunities to continue to widen that community. And then, reverting back to the mode of just kind of assimilation, you just kind of don't do that. So stepping up and being more intentional about building these connections, I think is something that is so important, especially in a community that doesn't always want to speak up, if we were to generalize on stereotypes here. And so I think Clara and watching Jessalyn, who is one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life, same thing, saw her multiple times at different events, but never really went to introduce myself to her until Tasha helped me connect with her. And I think, why are we not doing more and finding more intentional ways to connect, our communities, to make sure that we are creating a louder voice and an opportunity to speak for those who don't feel comfortable speaking? I don't even know if that answered your question, but
yeah, it certainly did. And I think you're right. Ingrained in us is this, it's not maybe shyness or introvert, but we're not taught to speak up. It's a generational trauma. And when we do speak up, sometimes when I first start speaking up, someone was like, whoa, don't be so defensive. It's like, no, I'm just speaking up. But you're right. I think we should assert ourselves more and also accept the person that asserts themselves, like, oh, okay, you're reaching out to me. Great. I want to help you. I want to listen. But thank you for that. And I'd love to throw a question for all of you to answer. And that would be, if you could tell your younger self, maybe that person that was just starting your career, what would you say? And we can go around the room. We can start with, who have we talked to? Atit. Why don't you go first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that we talked a lot about voice, and I think that I would have brought myself, the one that hung out with friends, the one, who, is a music enthusiast, and just like beyond my professional life, just so well anchored and have all rhythms and eccentricities and things like that, to my voice out of the gate. I think that I was working with the Ascend organization on this thing called The Other Side, which is a platform to illuminate the other side of like Asian professional leadership. And one of the stories I shared around voice was just like, as I switched careers multiple times. I was an account person. I was a liberal arts kid who ended up as an account person at Digitas long ago. And I was like really drilling into some email I was writing to some client. It was the first time I was writing to a senior client. And a lovely manager I had at the time would not let me send it, because they were like, this doesn't sound like you. We would have hung out. They'd seen me in other situations, social and otherwise. They knew I wasn't, this buttoned up professional and kind of like subservient person. I was trying to write in a way that I thought you needed to sound professional. And they were like, the quickest way to make a hook with this client is to use your voice, to use the rhythms of your own voice, your own eccentricities, your own, flourish and your own passion for things, even if it's offbeat and not the typical way. And it's not so buttoned up, but it's you. I would have taken that advice. I did take that advice, and it was like one of the most useful things that I took. But I think for so many of us to understand, we've talked all the conversation about this, that these ways forward are nonlinear. There isn't an archetype for this. The most important thing we can all do is embrace our own voice, eccentricities, and all the things that make us memorable, the things that make us quiet or outspoken, the things that make us colorful in some way, and bring it to work and bring it to our lives in general. It's a true release valve. And it's amazing how palpable it is when people feel your authentic self present,
That's great. Thaz, what would you have told your younger self?
Gosh, I think part of it was that there is no playbook. I think that's a secret that not a lot of people know when you start in the industry, because you think it's all going to end up a certain way. And it isn't. It isn't. There, when you find yourself in the upper echelons of leadership, you definitely know there's no playbook. But even as we go through our lives as creative people, like, we don't know, like, there isn't, we work in this really wonderful squishy industry where there really isn't a very clear-cut answer on everything. It is about, again, that being able to be super comfortable in that gray space and being able to be moldable and malleable, and be comfortable with kind of, again, change and evolution, because things are going to be changing constantly. And I think, there's a lot to kind of the way that you want to control a thing. And I think that, again, probably because I'm a West Coaster, I'm very good at, like, at this point, letting go of things and letting go of certain things that don't serve me, and really being able to focus my attention into things that are going to grow and things that are going to allow not only my growth for myself, but growth for my team, and really kind of keep that as the forefront of what I do. Because it's really hard. When I was a junior coming up, it seemed like everybody with a cool accent had every answer. And I was like, you guys know everything. I was like, why was I not invited to this team? My Canadian accent did not take me that far. But I was like, but with that, I was like, what I learned was, it was the confidence in which you tell your stories. It is the authenticity in how you tell your stories, who the perspective's coming from, and how much you believe in it. And I think that's stuff that is, again, not told to you when you're coming up the ranks.
That's great. And everyone needs to remember, everyone has their own story. You don't have to be someone else's story. And that's great. Great advice. Chrissie, what would you have told your younger self?
Well, I've told myself three things. One is, your reason for coming to this industry does come true one day, which was always, I believe that I would one day be in a position to make things better. And purpose is a huge part of what drives me, right? As in building a better ecosystem, that one day it would happen. The second one would be, there'll be a time when you don't have to assimilate and look up the word assimilate. So I'm a logophile, right? For me, I'm a lover of words, the definition of them, the etymology. And that would have probably to me earlier on, because I just did assimilate. I didn't, because that was sort of how you survived. And so I think perhaps that understanding that things would change a little earlier on would have then allowed me to kind of point three, like, be cool with the voice that you have, right? Because it's not always a voice that talks with the most, I live in a media world, right? And there's a lot of jargon in it, and I tell a very human story. And a few years ago, one of my bosses was like, just be you. Really be you. And that has stayed with me. So I would have given little Chrissie a bit of reassurance, a little bit of prep, and a bit of confidence. So yeah.
Great. And Ronnie, what would you have told your younger self?
Part of me wants to say that I would have told myself to, that figure out ways to become more confident, more assertive, all the things, or that, it's going to be bumpy, but you're going to be fine. Part of me also says, because I'm a person that doesn't really live with regret. I feel like if any one thing in my life changed, no matter how painful something has been, no matter how traumatic something has been, no matter how, quite frankly, shitty it was to grow up at a point in Alabama where my nickname was Ho Chi Minh, to say to myself, just embrace the bumps. You're going to figure it out. You're going to be fine. Because I think that, I guess I don't really regret a single thing, because I think it has made me the person I am today, put me in the role where being a bit more, maybe extra sensitive, all those moments of reading the room and not wanting to say anything and fear that I'm going to look stupid, say something, draw too much attention. And it's just taught me to be just to become intuitively sensitive to things. And I think it's what allowed me to just love the profession that I've somehow fallen into for 25 years. And if nothing else, I guess I would just say you're going to be fine. It's going to work out. I think, in a world where, we all have some sort of a purpose, you're going to figure it out, even if I'm still trying to figure it out. That every one of these lessons is a lesson to learn. And maybe it's that, but to say, like, just embrace every bump and everything that you're going to go through. And at the end of the day, it's going to work out.
That's fabulous. Well, I'd like to open up to our Q&A. Bernice, I'll hand it off to you to go through our questions from our audience in the chat.
Yes, this is such an amazing panel. Thank you all, the panel, for being here, and everyone who's joining in from around the world. Thank you so much for listening. And we have some great questions that we want to go through. Just for the interest in time, maybe we'll just do 1 or 2 builds and not go too far. We do have a couple of questions to go through. Kind of based on the last question, conversation we talked about, we have a great question here from Aaron. What is your opinion on the passion versus practicality? He is struggling at being at the beginning of his career and whether to leave a stable job or pivoting to a more of an unstable one, but having more room for growth. Albeit maybe a lower salary, but, weighing that in for chances to advance. So essentially, how do you prioritize what you love over making money? Who wants to take that? Maybe Thaz. Thaz, you had such a good career moves. You might have a good advice here.
I think and everybody's different. Again, it's like any financial advisor who would say, you don't have to take my advice the way it is. But what I could potentially say is I think there are a lot of, everyone has different weights at different points of their lives as well. It's like but I will say, for me, I've been really fortunate in following passion and following kind of new, different kinds of opportunities, even when I had no idea what they were. Like when I joined BBH, I had a stable job working on a car count, but I was definitely not passionate about it. And, being able to work with an extraordinary creative leader like Pella Chanel, and kind of being able to work in a really small environment where we were building something. We had no idea what we were doing, but it was just so exciting and so new. And I learned so much from that experience. And for me, that roll of the dice was an extraordinary one. It changed the course of my career. Now, again, it's like, and everybody has a different set of weights when it comes to kind of what your familial pressures are, what your, what the actual financial burdens you have in your lives. But I was at a stage where I could take those kinds of risks. And again, for me, that was it turned out to be quite a high reward.
Great answer. Next question. How can we learn how to create an environment of belonging and take up space for others without offending others who don't necessarily understand how important it is? Ronnie, I see that you unmuted.
I didn't, but I'm. I think I forgot to mute. I think it's important to remember, if we go back and think about how many other generations we've been taught to think that at the end of the day, we all bleed the same blood, and it doesn't fly anymore. You have to recognize that in order for all of us to belong, you need to know in some way that we have different lived experiences, different life experiences, and we need to appreciate that, whether it be the color of our skins or where we've grown up or where we come from. In order for us to truly be kind of in a world where we belong, we have to become, I talk about this all the time, about being a bit more strategic, about being human. So it's like the intersection of strategy and humanity these days. And being human means we have to recognize that if we do have different lived and life experiences, we have to be okay that our opinions don't always matter. And not to get confused, that you can bring your full authentic self to work doesn't mean that you can come into any conversation or any part of the world where you think just because you believe something politically, socially, that should matter to the person you're speaking with. We have to get back to a point where we recognize that we need to leave space for us to disagree as humans, but still be empathetic enough to allow each other to bring kind of the best version of ourselves to any moment and any conversation. And I think belonging starts with us also just kind of staying grounded in the fact that our opinions aren't always relevant. In a world where, of course, we live in a society where social media makes us think that our opinion should be valid, and it's not always. I think accepting that, and then accepting the fact that just because your life experience may, have taken you down one path, does not mean it is for everyone. And I think that the sooner we can get back to that place of just real, true human empathy, I think it spans across every sort of conversation we're having around inclusivity, equity, and diversity and everything else, and truly creating places where we can belong. And I have a tendency to kind of get on a soapbox about this in our company because I'm so passionate about the idea of truly getting back to being human again.
Wonderful answer. This question is for Chrissie. Earlier, Atit talked about not having to be an asshole, but being told you probably should be an asshole. How did you navigate that being a woman in your career? And Atit.
Yeah. Goodness, I think you learn so much from great leaders and terrible ones, right, in your career. And so don't be an asshole, right, is generally my guidance on that. I think I think it's kind of the navigating of what's credible in your realm, right? So just because the model of leadership still continues to be, I think, aggressive or intimidating, that's what we see in popular culture. It's perhaps what maybe some of you might still experience. I think when you have, and I also think leadership happens at every level. And I say this to our clients. I said, don't think when you ask us for brave leaders, that's only the person who helms the team. I believe leadership happens whether you are an associate director, a manager, an assistant, so on and so forth. It is relevant to them. So it's upon us to give them the right capabilities to be leaders on their subject matter, right? And as you rise and you are therefore seen as a light, someone that for others to look towards, you should seek to have some responsibility in that, right? And say, actually, how do I what's my role in making this world, this org, that much better? So and as a woman, do you have I was asked this the other week, did I feel extra pressure in being a CEO? And I was like, I don't think I feel any extra pressure than women have generally, right? I think we move through the world with just quite a lot of pressure, full stop. If you're a mom, if you're not a mom, you'll have other challenges and responsibilities. So you have that anyway. I just know that because I'm in the room and I'm more able to make the decisions, I will call it out if I think there aren't enough minorities of all kinds, full stop. And I'm very comfortable saying it, to the point where perhaps it's sometimes a little startling for other people, because I would just be like, where's so-and-so? Let's have them in the room, please. Right. So I guess, yeah, that's my brand of being C-level and leading. But it's definitely because I don't want to be the asshole. Definitely don't want to do that. Yeah.
This is such an amazing conversation. And I think this is the same thing that happened like in all our conversations. I wish they were like twice as long. We always get here and we're like, oh my gosh, there's more questions. But I just want to say thank you to this amazing panel for joining. I'm so impressed and awed by the talent that's here. We'll also send you all these in a follow-up email. But our next event is actually November 10th. If you want to join for the Visibility Mindset, this is actually with Jesslyn and I. And also we have another great panel for this. And on the next page, we are actually meeting in person in New York. There's going to be a New York and a Los Angeles Asians in Advertising event. This is a great time to actually network in person. We will have food and drinks for you as well. So yes, the LA event, we will actually open this on November 1st. Both the events are limited to 50 people. So we're actually like saving the event to last all at once. The podcast. So This season, we have Suzie on as co-host. It's a great podcast to hear some amazing stories from incredible people in the industry. And then Jessalyn and I, for people who don't know, we actually wrote a book called The Visibility Mindset. That'll be out November 16th. If you like a copy, we would love, we will send you a pre-order link. And that's it. Thank you for giving me an extra minute. Join our private LinkedIn group. Feel free to reach out to anyone else here on the panel, on the board, Suzie, me, Jessalyn, Sina, Liz, thank you for helping us on the Agents and Advertising board team. Thank you so much. So wonderful meeting everyone. And if you want to stay after to chat, we'll be here. But thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us.